The Galactic Council ordered humans to surrender. Earth sent its smallest warship instead. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council had seen many strange days, but none stranger than this one. Delegates from 100 worlds sat in their tall chairs, arranged in circles around a floating table of light. The air smelled of ozone and old dust, the kind of smell that came from machines older than most planets. At the center of the room, a single hologram spun slowly. It showed a small blue and green planet, spinning quietly among the stars. That planet was called Earth. For 3 years, the Council had watched the humans. At first, nobody cared much. Humans were new. They had only found their way into deep space a few decades ago, stumbling out of their solar system in ships that seemed almost laughable next to Council fleets. But then the humans began to grow. They built colonies. They found new metals, new ways to bend light, new methods to keep their ships alive in the coldest parts of space. And worse, in the eyes of the Council, they began to make friends. Small species, weak species, species that had been pushed to the edges of the galaxy by stronger empires, started talking to humans, trading with them, asking them for help. The Council did not like that. "They are behaving as if they belong here," said Councillor Vren, a tall being with silver skin and eyes like black glass. He stood at the center of the chamber, his voice carrying easily through the hall. "They have no right. They have not paid the price the rest of us have paid. No wars of conquest, no centuries of struggle. They simply arrived, and now they act as equals." Murmurs rose from the crowd. Many species agreed with him. The galaxy had rules, unwritten but understood by everyone who had lived under Council law for generations. New species did not make alliances. New species did not interfere in old disputes. New species listened and waited, and eventually, if they were lucky, were allowed to join the lower ranks of Council society. Humans had skipped all of that. They had simply started being helpful, being curious, being present, without asking permission. "They are dangerous," Vren continued, "not because of their weapons. Their weapons are weak, primitive compared to ours. They are dangerous because of their ideas. Other species are starting to believe that strength does not decide everything. That is a poison. If we allow it to spread, order in this galaxy will collapse." A representative from a smaller species, a delegate from the Fenrai, a race of quiet insect-like beings who had long relied on human trade routes for medicine, tried to speak. "The humans have only ever offered friendship. They have shared food, shared cures, shared knowledge freely. I do not see the crime in that." Vren turned to the Fenrai delegate with a cold, thin smile. "That is exactly the crime. Friendship without price, help without control. It teaches the small species that they do not need the strong ones anymore." That is how order breaks. The Council voted that day. It was not close. Humanity would be given a single order: surrender their fleet, their colonies, and their independence to Council oversight, or face what the Council called correction. Everyone in that hall knew what correction meant. They had seen it before, used on other young species who had grown too fast, too proud. Fleets would come, worlds would burn, just enough to remind everyone who was truly in charge. The message was sent across the stars, carried by a Council courier ship faster than light, aimed straight at Earth. Not every Council member was happy with the decision. As the hall slowly emptied, a small group of delegates lingered near the edges of the chamber, speaking quietly among themselves. Among them was Councillor Yara Voss, a representative from one of the older member species, a race known as the Doran, who had joined the Council many centuries ago and had watched dozens of correction orders come and go over the years. "This one feels different," she said quietly to a colleague. "Vren is not simply enforcing order, he is afraid. I have seen that kind of fear before, in leaders who sense the ground shifting beneath them." Her colleague, an older being with deep green scales and tired eyes, shook his head slowly. "Afraid or not, the vote passed. There is nothing more to be done." "Perhaps," Voss said, though she did not sound convinced. "But I have lived long enough to know that fear rarely makes for wise decisions. We will see what kind of species these humans truly are, and whether Vren's fear was justified, or simply his own weakness dressed up as caution." She did not know it then, but her quiet doubt would matter more than she could have imagined, once the story of what humanity chose to do next reached every corner of the galaxy. On Earth, the message arrived at 3 in the morning, Washington time. It landed first, in the Deep Space Monitoring Station, buried under the Rocky Mountains, a place few people even knew existed. The station's night shift, a small team of tired engineers and one very alert artificial intelligence, named Oracle, picked up the signal instantly. "We have an incoming transmission," Oracle said, its voice calm but firm, the kind of calm that came from knowing exactly how bad the situation was. "Council origin. Priority, highest." The head engineer on duty, a woman named Elena Cruz, rubbed her eyes and sat up straighter. "Play it." The message appeared as both audio and text, translated instantly by Oracle's language systems, which had spent the last 2 years quietly learning every council dialect it could find. The voice that spoke was Vren's, cold and formal, delivering the council's demand without a single word of kindness. "To the species known as humanity, the Galactic Council has reviewed your conduct and found it unacceptable. You have exceeded the boundaries permitted to a species of your age and standing. You are ordered to surrender all military assets, cease independent expansion, and submit to council oversight within 30 standard days. Failure to comply will result in immediate correction." The room went silent. Elena stared at the message for a long moment before picking up the phone that connected directly to the Pentagon's new Off-World Defense Office, a department that had only existed for 18 months, created the day humanity first made contact with an alien species, and realized just how small they truly were in the grand scheme of the galaxy. Within an hour, the news had reached every major government on Earth. Within 2 hours, world leaders were gathered, some in person, most through secure video links, all trying to understand what had just happened and what could possibly be done about it. General Marcus Webb, the head of Earth's newly formed Unified Defense Command, stood at the front of the room, staring at a star map that showed just how small humanity's fleet really was, compared to what the Council could send. Earth had exactly 41 warships. The Council, according to every estimate their scientists could put together, could send thousands. "They want us to surrender," Webb said, his voice flat. "No fight, no negotiation. Just give it all up, or get destroyed." A younger officer near the back, Captain Sarah Chen, spoke up. "Sir, if we surrender, what happens to the colonies, to Mars, to the outposts on Europa, to everyone who moved out there believing we could protect them?" Webb didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. Everyone in the room already knew that surrender would mean losing everything humanity had built beyond Earth in the last 20 years. It would mean handing over control of every ship, every station, every human being living beyond the moon, to a council that had already shown, through a dozen examples across the galaxy, exactly how it treated species it considered beneath it. "We're not surrendering," Webb finally said. "But we're also not stupid enough to think we can fight the entire council fleet and win. We need another way." Around the table, murmurs of agreement mixed with murmurs of doubt. The President of the United States, sitting quietly at the head of the table through a secure video feed from the White House, leaned forward with tired eyes. She had not slept in over 20 hours, and the weight of the decision ahead of her showed clearly on her face. "General Webb," she said, "I understand the instinct not to surrender. I feel it too. But I need to know, we are not simply choosing pride over the lives of billions of people. If there is truly no way to resist, then I need to hear that plainly, so we can begin planning how to protect as many people as possible under whatever comes next." "With respect, Madam President," Captain Sarah Chen said, "surrender doesn't protect people. We've all seen the reports on other species who surrendered to council correction. Their populations aren't harmed directly, not usually, but their freedom disappears completely. No independent fleets, no independent colonies, no say in their own future, ever again. That's not protection. That's a slow kind of ending." The room fell quiet again. Everyone understood the truth in her words, even if no one wanted to say it out loud. It was in that heavy silence that an aide quietly stepped forward and handed General Webb a data tablet. "Sir, there's a call coming in. Geneva Research Division. They're saying it's urgent, related directly to the council situation." Webb glanced at the tablet, then back at the room. "Patch it through." That call, from Dr. Priya Nair, would change the course of everything that followed. Representatives from nearly every nation on Earth, REM was gathered over the following 2 days, some through secure calls, some flying in person to a hastily arranged summit at the United Nations headquarters in New York. It was the first time in human history that the entire planet had faced a single decision together, a decision that could not be solved by any one country alone. Old rivalries, old arguments over borders and resources, suddenly seemed small and foolish compared to the question hanging over everyone's heads. Surrender or resist, knowing resistance might mean total destruction. Dr. Priya Nair was flown in directly to present her findings to the assembled leaders. She stood before the massive General Assembly Hall, a room built originally for arguments about trade routes and climate agreements, now filled with the weight of an entire species' survival. The right of answer is real, she explained, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's speakers. It is buried deep in council legal history, rarely used, because most species facing a correction order simply do not believe they have a case worth presenting. But we do. Humanity has broken no treaty. We have committed no act of aggression against any council member. Our only crime, in their eyes, is succeeding too quickly and making too many friends along the way. A representative from Japan raised a hand. And if this legal argument fails, if the council simply ignores their own law, then we will have lost nothing. We were not already going to lose, Priya answered honestly. But if it works, even partially, we buy ourselves time, and more importantly, we buy ourselves respect. Right now, the entire galaxy sees humanity as either something to fear or something to erase. This is our chance to show them something else entirely. The vote to pursue the right of answer and to send General Webb's proposed ship instead of a fleet passed with near unanimous support. For the first time in memory, humanity stood united behind a single, unified decision, made not out of anger or fear, but out of quiet, careful hope. That another way came from an unexpected place. 3 days after the council's message arrived, a small research team based in Geneva reached out to Webb's office with an idea so strange that at first, nobody wanted to hear it. The team was led by a soft-spoken scientist named Dr. Priya Nair, who had spent the last decade studying not weapons, not shields, but something far less exciting to most military minds, council law itself. They gave us 30 days, Priya explained to General Webb over a secure call. That's not a random number. Council law requires a minimum response period for any species being issued a correction order, especially one already engaged in trade agreements with recognized member species. It's part of something called the right of answer. Webb frowned. The right of answer? It means we're allowed to respond, Priya said, not just with words. Any species under correction order has the legal right to send a single ship to the council's meeting point to formally present their case before the fleet is deployed. It's ancient law, buried in about 6,000 pages of council legal code. Almost nobody uses it anymore, because almost nobody who receives a correction order actually believes they have a case worth presenting. They just surrender. So we send a ship, Webb said slowly. And do what exactly? Beg? No, Priya said, and for the first time, there was something like excitement in her voice. We use the law itself. The right of answer says, the responding species may choose which ship to send. It doesn't say it has to be a warship. It doesn't say it has to be big. It just has to be a ship, crewed, and capable of making the journey. Webb leaned back in his chair, starting to understand. You're saying we send our smallest ship. I'm saying we send exactly the ship the council doesn't expect, Priya said. They're expecting either surrender or a fleet that gets crushed in 5 minutes. If we send our smallest ship, our fastest, most quietly capable ship, with the right crew and the right plan, we're not just following the law, we're making a statement. We're telling every species watching that Earth isn't afraid, and Earth isn't stupid enough to throw away a fleet it needs to defend its own colonies. The room went quiet as everyone considered what she was suggesting. There's a ship, Webb said after a long pause. The Kestrel. It's the smallest warship in the fleet, built for scouting, not combat. Barely 30 meters long. Crew of 6. Perfect, Priya said. Small enough to prove a point, fast enough to survive if things go wrong, and crewed by people who know exactly what they're walking into. The Kestrel sat in dry dock at Earth's main orbital shipyard, a sleek, dark shape barely visible against the stars behind it. Compared to the massive council warships that had been spotted patrolling nearby systems, ships that stretched for kilometers and carried weapons that could crack a planet's crust, The Kestrel looked almost like a toy. It had no heavy cannons, no thick plating, nothing that would strike fear into anyone who saw it. What it did have was speed. The Kestrel could outrun almost anything in known space. It had a stealth system built from technology humanity had reverse engineered, from a wrecked Council scout ship found drifting near Jupiter 2 years earlier, a discovery humanity had kept quiet, telling no one, not even their new alien trade partners. It had a crew that had trained for exactly this kind of mission, quiet, careful, precise work, the kind that didn't involve big battles but instead involved surviving in places you were never supposed to be. Captain Elias Reyes stood at the base of the Kestrel's boarding ramp, looking up at the ship that would carry him and his crew into the heart of Council space. He was not a large man. He did not look like the kind of hero people expected to save a planet. He had a quiet face, tired eyes, and hands that shook slightly from years of exposure to deep space radiation during his early scouting missions. But he had flown further into unknown space than almost anyone alive, and he had come back every single time. Behind him stood his crew. Lieutenant May Tanaka, the ship's pilot, sharp-eyed and fast-thinking, someone who could fly the Kestrel through gaps other pilots wouldn't even attempt. Engineer Oscar Lindquist, a big quiet man who had personally rebuilt half the ship's systems by hand and trusted no one else to touch his engines. Communications Officer Amara Okafor, fluent in more alien languages than anyone else on Earth, having spent the last 2 years working directly with Oracle to build translation systems from scratch. Weapons Officer Diego Ruiz, calm under pressure, the kind of person who never raised his voice even when things were falling apart around him. And finally, Dr. Priya Nair herself, who had insisted on joining the mission, since no one understood Council law better than she did, and if this mission was going to work, it would work because of the law, not because of weapons. "This is a strange kind of mission," Reyes said quietly to his crew, as they stood together one final time before boarding. "We're not going to fight a war. We're going to walk into the middle of a fleet bigger than anything humanity has ever seen, and we're going to talk. And if the talking doesn't work, we're going to run, and we're going to make sure the whole galaxy sees us run, fast enough and smart enough that they understand exactly what kind of species they're dealing with." May Tanaka smiled slightly. "So basically, we're the smallest ship in the fight, doing the most important job in the fleet." "Basically," Reyes said. "Any last thoughts before we go?" Oscar grunted. "Engines are ready. Ship won't let us down." Amara adjusted the small earpiece connected to Oracle's translation feed. "Language systems are fully synced. I can talk to anyone the Council sends, in their own words." Diego checked the shield status on his datapad one more time, though everyone already knew the numbers by heart. "Weapons are minimal, but shields are the best we've got. If this goes wrong, we run, we don't fight. Understood?" Priya held a small data tablet against her chest, filled with legal texts and Council precedent, the closest thing they had to a weapon that could actually win this fight. "The law is on our side. We just have to make sure they can't ignore it." Reyes nodded slowly, looking at each of them in turn. Then he turned and looked up at the small dark shape of the Kestrel, waiting silently against the stars. "Then let's go tell the Galactic Council," he said, "that Earth isn't surrendering." One by one, the crew climbed the boarding ramp and disappeared into the ship. Minutes later, the Kestrel's engines came to life, a soft blue glow spreading along its hull. It lifted slowly away from the shipyard, turned toward open space, and vanished into the dark, carrying with it 6 people, a small ship, and the entire future of humanity. Behind them, Earth spun quietly in the void, unaware that its fate now rested not on the size of its fleet, but on the courage of its smallest warship, and the 6 people who had chosen to fly it into the heart of the storm. Far across the galaxy, the Council's fleet had already begun gathering at the meeting point, thousands of warships forming into position, waiting for either a surrender or an execution. What they were not prepared for, what no one in the history of Council law had ever truly prepared for, was a single small ship arriving not to beg, and not to fight, but to stand its ground. The 30-day countdown had begun, and somewhere in the vast dark between the stars, the Kestrel flew on, carrying humanity's answer to a galaxy that had underestimated it from the very beginning. The Kestrel moved through open space like a whisper, its stealth systems humming quietly beneath the floor plates. For the first 6 days of the journey, there was little to do but travel, check systems, and think about what waited at the end of the flight. Captain Elias Reyes spent most of those days walking the narrow corridors of his small ship, checking in with each member of his crew, making sure spirits stayed steady, even as the weight of the mission pressed down harder with every passing hour. Reyes thought often, during those quiet early days, about how he had ended up here. He had joined Earth's scouting program not out of any grand desire for glory, but out of simple curiosity, a need to know what lay beyond the edges of the maps humanity had drawn for itself. He had never imagined that curiosity would one day place him at the center of his species' entire future, yet here he was, captain of the smallest ship in Earth's fleet, carrying a responsibility heavier than any warship could bear. The Kestrel was not built for comfort. 6 people lived in a space barely larger than a large house, with narrow bunks, a small shared galley, and systems that hummed constantly in the background, a reminder that space itself was trying to kill everyone on board, every single second. But the crew had trained together for years. They knew how to live in close quarters without losing their minds, how to find quiet moments even in the middle of danger. During the quiet hours between shifts, the crew found small ways to hold on to their humanity, even as the mission ahead grew heavier with every passing day. Diego Ruiz, usually the calmest of the group, spent his free time teaching Oscar Lindquist how to play chess, using a small magnetic set that clipped to the galley table so the pieces wouldn't drift away in low gravity. Oscar, despite his size and his gruff manner, turned out to be a surprisingly patient student, though he lost every single game for the first 4 days straight. "You are letting me win," Oscar grumbled one evening, staring at the board with deep suspicion. "I promise you, I am not," Diego said, hiding a smile. "You're just thinking about chess the same way you think about engines. Straight lines, direct power. Chess isn't like that. Sometimes the smart move looks weak until 3 moves later." Mei Tanaka overheard this from her seat nearby, sketching quietly in a small notebook she kept for moments like these, moments of quiet in the middle of chaos. "Sounds like good advice for more than just chess," she said without looking up. Amara Okafor spent much of her free time reviewing translation files with Oracle, running through possible conversations, imagining every version of what the council might say and how she might respond. She had learned early in her career that words, chosen carefully, could open doors that force never could, and she intended to make sure that when the moment came, not a single word would be wasted or misunderstood. Captain Reyes, for his part, spent his quiet hours reading through old mission logs from Earth's earliest deep space scouts, men and women who had ventured into the unknown, decades before humanity had ever encountered another species, back when the greatest danger was simply the silence of empty space itself. He found a strange comfort in those old records, a reminder that humanity had always been a species willing to step into the dark, not because it was safe, but because someone had to be first. Dr. Priya Nair rarely slept more than a few hours at a time, her small cabin filled with data tablets covered in notes, cross-references, and legal precedents, preparing not just for the presentation ahead, but for every possible argument the council might raise against them. She knew, better than anyone aboard, that the words she chose in that chamber could mean the difference between humanity's survival and its destruction, and the weight of that responsibility rarely left her thoughts, even in sleep. On the 7th day, Amara Okafor called everyone to the small command deck. Her face, usually calm, had a tight, serious look that made everyone move quickly. "We're picking up long-range sensor pings," she said, pulling up a display showing faint lines of light moving across a star map. "Still far off, but they're council in origin. Patrol ships, probably scouting the border near the meeting point." Reyes leaned over the display. "Do they know we're here?" "Our stealth systems are holding," Oscar Lindquist said from his station, eyes fixed on the ship's core readouts. "Engines running cold, hull matching background radiation. To their sensors, we should look like empty space." "Should," Diego Ruiz repeated quietly, arms crossed. "Let's hope should is good enough." They continued forward, adjusting their course slightly to avoid the patrol ships without slowing down. Mei Tanaka guided the Kestrel through the gap between 2 patrol routes with practiced precision, her hands steady on the controls even as the tension in the room grew thicker. For nearly an hour, everyone held their breath, watching the sensor display as 2 massive council patrol ships passed within a few thousand kilometers of their position, completely unaware of the small human ship slipping quietly past them in the dark. Once the patrol ships were far behind, A collective breath of relief passed through the crew. That, May said, leaning back in her pilot's chair, was too close. It's only going to get closer, Priya Nair said quietly from her seat near the back of the deck. The meeting point is surrounded by the entire Council fleet. We won't be able to sneak past that. We'll have to fly straight through. Reyes nodded slowly. He had known this from the start, but hearing it said out loud made the reality of what they were about to do feel heavier. Then we make sure they see exactly what we want them to see. A small, harmless-looking ship, following the law, asking to be heard. And if they decide the law doesn't matter to them? Diego asked. Then we run, Reyes said simply. And we make sure every species watching sees us outrun a fleet that outnumbers us 1,000 to 1. That story will travel faster than any Council message ever could. 3 days later, the Kestrel reached the edge of Council space, a region marked by a massive collection of warships gathered near a dead star system, known simply as Threshold. It was here that Council fleets traditionally gathered before major military actions, a tradition going back centuries. As the Kestrel approached, even from a great distance, the crew could see the scale of what they were flying into. Thousands of warships floated in tight formation, some larger than small moons, their hulls dark and heavy, built for war and conquest rather than comfort or beauty. Between them moved smaller support ships, scout vessels and command cruisers, all arranged with the kind of precision that spoke of centuries of military tradition. At the center of the formation floated the Council's flagship, a massive vessel known as the Judgment, easily the largest ship any human had ever seen, its hull stretching for kilometers, covered in weapons systems that could level a continent in a single strike. Oscar stared at the readouts with a kind of quiet disbelief he rarely allowed himself to show. I have studied every warship humanity has ever built, he said slowly. I have studied every wreck we have ever recovered from Council scouts. Nothing prepared me for seeing it like this, all together, all at once. Priya moved closer to the display, her eyes scanning the formation with a more analytical eye, searching not for the fear the sight was designed to create, but for information. Look at their formation pattern, she said. It's rigid, traditional, built for overwhelming force, against an enemy that fights back the way they expect an enemy to fight. Predictable formations like that usually mean predictable rules of engagement as well. Good to know, Diego muttered, assuming they follow their own rules. My God, May whispered, staring at the display as the Kestrel's sensors mapped out the full size of the fleet. There's no way we can fight that. We're not here to fight, Reyes reminded her, though even his voice carried a note of tension he couldn't quite hide. We're here to talk. Amara's console chimed sharply. Incoming transmission. Council origin. It's a direct hail. They see us, Diego said quietly. Play it, Reyes ordered. The voice that came through was cold, mechanical, translated instantly by the Kestrel's onboard systems. Unidentified vessel. You have entered restricted Council space without authorization. State your identity and purpose immediately, or you will be destroyed. Amara's hands moved quickly over her console, activating the translation and response system she had built with Oracle over the past 2 years. This is the vessel Kestrel, representing the species designated Humanity of the Sol system. We invoke the right of answer under Council Legal Code, Section 4, Article 12. We request passage to present our formal response to the correction order issued against our species. There was a long pause. On the display, dozens of Council warships began adjusting their positions, some turning weapon systems toward the small human ship, others simply watching. Sensors focused entirely on the strange little vessel that had appeared at the edge of their fleet. Finally, a new voice came through, different from the first, older, sharper. This is Fleet Commander Threx of the Judgment. The right of answer has not been invoked by any species in over 200 years. Confirm your claim, human vessel, or you will be treated as a hostile intrusion. Priya stepped forward, standing beside Amara's console. Transmit the legal documentation, she said quietly. Everything. Section 4, Article 12, along with the historical precedents I compiled. Let them see we know exactly what we're doing. Amara nodded and sent the data. For a long, tense moment, nothing happened. The entire crew stood frozen, watching the display, watching thousands of warships hang silently in space around their tiny ship, waiting for a single word that could mean survival or destruction. Finally, Commander Threx's voice returned, quieter now, tinged with something that might have been surprise, or perhaps grudging respect. Your claim is valid. The right of answer has been formally invoked. You will be granted passage to the judgment to present your case before Counselor Vren and the assembled fleet command. Deviate from the designated path, and you will be destroyed instantly. Is this understood? Understood, Amara replied, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. A new course appeared on the Kestrel's navigation display, a narrow path leading directly through the heart of the Council fleet toward the massive flagship at its center. Well, May said quietly, hands tightening on the controls. Here we go. The flight through the Council fleet was unlike anything the crew of the Kestrel had ever experienced. On every side, massive warships loomed above and below them, their hulls stretching far beyond what any human eye had ever needed to comprehend before this mission. Weapon systems the size of buildings tracked their small ship as it moved slowly through the formation, a silent reminder that a single mistake, a single wrong move, could end everything in an instant. Inside the Kestrel, no one spoke. The only sounds were the quiet hum of the engines and the soft beeping of sensor systems tracking their slow, careful path through the fleet. Reyes stood at the center of the command deck, watching the display with a calm expression that hid the storm of thoughts running through his mind. This was the moment everything depended on. Not just his crew, not just this mission, but the future of every human being alive, and every human being yet to be born. Halfway through the formation, a smaller Council patrol craft broke from its position and moved to intercept, drifting close alongside the Kestrel, close enough that its hull lights illuminated the human ship's viewport with a cold blue glow. Inside the Kestrel, everyone tensed. They're just watching, Amara said quietly, monitoring the patrol craft's systems as best she could. No weapons lock, no hostile signal. Curiosity, maybe, Priya suggested. We're the first new species to invoke the right of answer in 2 centuries. I imagine word has already spread through the fleet. The patrol craft lingered for nearly a full minute, matching their speed, before finally peeling away and returning to its original position. Reyes let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That's not going to be the last time something like that happens, he said. Everyone stays calm. We're not hiding anymore. Every ship in this fleet knows exactly where we are, and exactly what we're doing. All we can do now is keep moving forward. As they passed beneath the shadow of a warship, easily 10 times the size of the Judgment itself, Diego finally broke the silence. You ever think about how strange this is? 6 people, 1 tiny ship, flying straight through the middle of the biggest fleet any of us has ever seen, just to ask them nicely not to destroy our planet. When you put it that way, Oscar muttered from his station, it sounds insane. It is insane, Priya said quietly. But it's also exactly the kind of insane that might actually work. They expect fear. They expect us to either run or grovel. Instead, we're flying calmly through their entire fleet, like it's just another Tuesday. Reyes allowed himself a small, tight smile. Let's hope that confidence holds up when we're standing in front of the Council itself. Slowly, carefully, the Kestrel approached the massive form of the Judgment, its hull looming larger with every passing minute, until it filled the entire forward viewport, blocking out the stars completely. A docking bay opened along its side, a massive space large enough to fit a dozen ships the size of the Kestrel, glowing with soft blue light that guided them inside. Inside the docking bay, the scale of the Judgment became even more apparent. The ceiling stretched so high above them that it disappeared into shadow, and the walls were lined with rows of docked fighter craft, each one larger than the Kestrel itself, standing silent and ready, like sleeping giants, waiting for a call to arms. Ground crews moved about in the distance, pausing their work to watch the strange small vessel drift slowly toward its assigned landing space, whispers passing between them that none of the humans could hear, but all of them could imagine. May guided the Kestrel down with practiced precision, setting it gently onto the platform with barely a bump, a small final act of quiet defiance. Proof that even here, in the heart of enemy territory, her hands had not shaken once. As the Kestrel settled gently onto the docking platform, the engines powering down for the first time in over a week, Reyes turned to his crew one final time. Whatever happens in there, he said, we do this together. We stay calm, we stay steady, and we remind them exactly why humanity doesn't belong on its knees. One by one, the crew nodded, steel in their eyes despite the fear that lived quietly beneath the surface. Amara checked her earpiece one final time, running a silent diagnostic on the translation feed, while Oscar gave the engine controls one last affectionate pat, a quiet habit he had carried since his earliest days flying scout missions back home. Diego rolled his shoulders, settling into the same calm readiness he brought to every mission, dangerous or not. Priya held her data tablet a little tighter, aware that in the next few minutes, her words would matter more than they ever had in her life. Together, they moved toward the airlock, ready to step out into the heart of the very fleet that had been sent to destroy everything they loved. The airlock hissed open, revealing a massive chamber filled with council soldiers, tall and armored, weapons held ready but not raised, watching the small human crew with a mixture of curiosity and open suspicion. Beyond them, a wide corridor stretched toward the center of the ship, leading, they knew, toward the chamber where Counselor Vren himself waited to hear humanity's answer. As they stepped out onto the docking platform, a young council soldier, smaller than the others and clearly less experienced, stared at the human crew with wide, curious eyes, forgetting for a moment to keep the disciplined expression his training demanded. Amara caught his gaze and offered a small, calm nod. The soldier blinked, startled, then quickly straightened his posture, though something in his eyes had shifted, a flicker of curiosity that had not been there a moment before. "They're not what I expected," May whispered quietly to Diego as they walked. "None of us are," Diego replied. "That's kind of the point." The corridor stretched on, lined with more soldiers, more silent watchers, some clearly hostile, others simply curious, drawn by rumors that had already begun spreading through the fleet about the strange small ship that had appeared at their border, and calmly demanded to be heard. Word traveled fast among a fleet, with little else to do but wait, and by the time the human crew reached the massive doors leading into the central chamber, it seemed as though every soldier aboard the Judgment had found some reason to be nearby, watching, whispering, wondering. Reyes stepped forward first, followed closely by his crew, walking calmly into the heart of the fleet that had come to bring humanity to its knees. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing for certain: humanity was not here to surrender. Humanity was here to be heard. The corridor leading toward the heart of the Judgment felt endless. Tall metal walls stretched upward, lined with strange glowing symbols that pulsed faintly with light, a language none of the humans could read, though Amara Okafor studied every symbol carefully, quietly feeding what she saw into Oracle's translation database through her earpiece. Council soldiers walked on either side of the small human group, tall and silent, their armor clinking softly with every step, weapons carried but not raised, a small mercy that did little to calm the tension in the air. Captain Elias Reyes walked at the front of his crew, his pace steady, his face calm, despite the storm building quietly in his chest. Behind him walked May Tanaka, Oscar Lindquist, Diego Ruiz, Amara Okafor, and Dr. Priya Nair, each of them carrying themselves with the same careful calm, 6 humans walking through the belly of a fleet built to destroy their entire species. Halfway down the corridor, one of the council soldiers, a broad-shouldered being with mottled gray skin and deep-set yellow eyes, slowed his pace slightly to walk closer to Reyes. He said nothing for a long moment, simply studying the human captain, with an expression that was difficult to read. Finally, in halting, careful words translated through a small device on his chest, he spoke. "You are not afraid." It was not quite a question. Reyes considered his answer carefully before replying. "I am afraid," he said honestly. "Every one of us is afraid. We are simply choosing not to let that fear decide what we do next." The soldier said nothing more, but something in his posture shifted slightly. A small, almost imperceptible change, as though the answer had surprised him in a way he had not expected to be surprised. At the end of the corridor, massive doors slid open, revealing a chamber so large, it took a moment for the human eyes to adjust to its scale. The room stretched upward for what looked like hundreds of meters, its walls lined with balconies filled with representatives from dozens of species, all gathered to witness this rare and strange event. Some delegates were tall and thin, draped in robes made from shimmering fabric that seemed to shift color with the light. Others were low to the ground, covered in thick plating, watching with unreadable, ancient eyes. A few floated gently above their designated platforms, suspended by small anti-gravity devices built into ornate chairs, their attention fixed intently on the small group of humans walking below. At the center of the chamber stood a raised platform, and upon it, waiting with cold, patient eyes, stood Counselor Vren himself, tall and silver-skinned, flanked by several other high-ranking council members, including Fleet Commander Threx. "So," Vren said, his voice carrying easily through the massive chamber, translated instantly by systems built into the room itself, "this is the ship humanity chose to send. Not a fleet, not even a proper warship, a scout, barely large enough to carry 6 crew members." He allowed a thin, humorless smile to cross his face. "I must admit, I did not expect this particular kind of arrogance." Reyes stepped forward, stopping at the base of the platform, looking up at the council members without a trace of fear in his eyes. "We did not come here to show strength through size, Counselor. We came here because the law allows it, and because we believe our case deserves to be heard." "The law," Vren repeated, his tone dripping with something between amusement and contempt. "Very well, human. You have invoked the right of answer. Present your case, and then we will decide whether it changes anything at all." From beside him, Fleet Commander Threx studied the small human crew with open curiosity, his arms folded behind his back. He had spent decades enforcing council law across 100 systems, and in all that time, he could not remember a single species standing so calmly before an entire fleet gathered for their destruction. He said nothing, but his eyes lingered a moment longer on Reyes than protocol strictly required. Above them, in the crowded balconies, representatives from dozens of species leaned forward with quiet interest. Many had never seen a human before, not in person. They had only heard stories, rumors passed along trade routes, tales of a strange new species that gave help without demanding loyalty in return. Now, seeing 6 small, unarmed figures standing calmly at the base of the council platform, many of those representatives found themselves reconsidering everything they thought they knew. "Then let us begin," Vren said, gesturing sharply toward Priya's small tablet. "Present your legal argument, human. Waste no more of this council's time." Priya Nair stepped forward beside Reyes, her small data tablet glowing softly in her hands. "Counselor Vren, honored members of the council, we are here to respectfully challenge the correction order issued against humanity. We believe this order violates several fundamental principles of council law, principles that have protected countless species throughout this galaxy's history." She activated her tablet, and a holographic display appeared above the chamber floor, showing lines of legal text alongside historical records. "Council law, as established under the founding charter, states that correction orders may only be issued against species who have committed direct acts of aggression against council members, or who have violated established treaties. Humanity has done neither. We have engaged in trade, in cooperation, in mutual aid with numerous smaller species, actions explicitly protected under Article 9 of the same charter you claim we have violated." She continued, her voice steady despite the enormity of the room around her. "Furthermore, the correction order itself was issued within days of humanity, establishing new trade agreements with 3 separate member species. We do not believe this timing is coincidental. Council precedent, recorded in the case of the Ilvanari dispute nearly 400 years ago, established clearly that correction orders motivated primarily by political concern rather than direct legal violation are subject to immediate review and possible reversal. We ask this council to apply that same standard here, fairly and without prejudice." A murmur rose through the balconies above, quiet conversations breaking out among the gathered representatives. Vren's expression tightened slightly, though he quickly regained his composure. "You misunderstand the nature of your violation, human. It is not what you have done that concerns the council. It is the effect your actions have had on the stability of this galaxy's order." "Then perhaps," Priya said calmly, "the council should clarify exactly which law humanity has broken, because as it stands, this correction order appears to be based not on legal violation, but on fear. Fear that humanity's example of cooperation without domination threatens a system built on domination itself." The chamber went quiet. Even Vren seemed momentarily unsure how to respond to such a direct accusation, spoken so plainly in front of dozens of watching species. It was Fleet Commander Threx who finally broke the silence, stepping forward with a curious expression on his weathered face. You speak boldly for a species that has existed among the stars for less than a century. Do you understand what you are truly suggesting? That the entire structure of council governance is built on fear rather than order? I am suggesting, Priya replied evenly, that there is a difference between order and control. Order protects, control demands submission. Humanity has never sought to control anyone. We have only ever offered partnership. From the balconies above, a new voice called out, hesitant but clear. It belonged to a small, insect-like being, the same Fenrir delegate who had spoken in humanity's defense during the original council vote. The humans speak the truth. My people have received medicine from Earth that saved thousands of lives, medicine offered freely, without demand for territory or loyalty in return. I have never once felt controlled by them, only helped. Other voices began to rise from the balconies, quiet at first, then growing louder. A representative from the Corvi, a bird-like species who had struggled for years to secure fair trade agreements with larger council members, spoke next. Humanity built us a relay station near our home system, free of charge, when no one else would even answer our trade requests. I do not understand this talk of danger. I have only seen kindness. Another voice joined in, this one belonging to a delegate from a species the humans had never even heard of, a race of tall, thin beings covered in fine blue fur, native to a system 300 light-years from Sol. My people were nearly wiped out by a plague 2 years ago. It was human doctors, working alongside our own healers, who found a cure in time. I owe my grandchildren's lives to that help. I will not sit quietly while this council calls that a crime. Representatives from several smaller species that had quietly benefited from humanity's presence over the past few years, began speaking in support, some cautiously, others with growing confidence, as they realized they were not alone in their opinions. Vren's expression darkened as the murmurs grew into something closer to open debate. He raised a hand sharply, silencing the chamber. Enough. This hearing is not a vote. The council's decision stands, unless legal precedent proves otherwise. He turned his cold eyes back toward Reyes and his crew. Your legal arguments are noted, human. But arguments alone will not undo the order that has already been issued. You have presented your case. Now, the council will deliberate. There is one more matter, Reyes said, his voice calm but firm, cutting through the tension in the room. Vren raised an eyebrow. And what would that be, Captain? You called our ship an insult, Reyes said. A scout, too small to matter. But I would ask the council to consider why we chose to send it. He paused, letting his words settle over the chamber. We could have sent our entire fleet, 41 warships, every soldier we have, and lost every single one of them against your forces. That would have proven nothing except that humanity is capable of dying bravely. Instead, we sent our smallest, fastest ship, crewed by 6 people, willing to walk unarmed into the heart of your entire battle fleet, not to fight, but to talk. We did this because we believe words still matter more than weapons. We did this because we believe this council, despite everything, still values its own laws enough to listen. He looked directly into Vren's eyes. If that belief is wrong, then perhaps it is not humanity who has misunderstood the nature of this galaxy's order. Silence fell over the chamber, heavier than before. Even Threx seemed to study Reyes with newfound interest, his earlier cold formality replaced by something closer to genuine curiosity. Vren stared down at the small human captain for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally he spoke, his voice quieter than before, though no less firm. The council will deliberate on your case, Captain Reyes. You and your crew will remain aboard your vessel until a decision is reached. I caution you, do not mistake this pause for mercy. The correction order remains active until formally overturned. Understood, Reyes said simply, giving a small, respectful nod. As the council guards escorted the human crew back toward the docking bay, Amara leaned close to Reyes, speaking quietly enough that only he could hear. That went better than I expected. It's not over yet, Reyes replied under his breath. We planted the seed. Now we just have to survive long enough to see if it grows. Behind them, in the massive chamber, quiet conversations had already begun spreading among the gathered representatives, species who had watched, for the first time in centuries, a small and seemingly insignificant ship stand its ground against the full weight of the Galactic Council. Word of what had happened in that chamber would travel fast, faster than any official council announcement, carried by whispers between allies, by messages sent quietly between trade partners, by the simple, undeniable fact that humanity had not begged, had not run, and had not backed down. In a private chamber deep within the judgment, away from the eyes of the assembled representatives, Councillor Vren stood alone, staring out at the endless stars through a wide viewport. Fleet Commander Threx entered quietly behind him, waiting a respectful moment before speaking. "The chamber is talking, Councillor," Threx said. "Word is already spreading beyond this fleet. Trade partners, smaller species, even some of our own officers. Many are asking why we sought to correct a species that has done nothing but help others." Vren did not turn around. "They do not understand what is at stake," he said quietly. "This is not about one species. It is about the order that has held this galaxy together for 1,000 years. If the small species learn that strength no longer decides everything, that order collapses, piece by piece, until nothing is left but chaos. Or," Threx said carefully, "perhaps it becomes something stronger than order built on fear ever was. I do not know the answer, Counselor, but I know what I saw today. 6 humans, unarmed, calm, standing before this entire fleet without flinching. That is not the behavior of a species that means to destroy us. That is the behavior of a species that believes, perhaps foolishly, perhaps not, that this council still values its own laws." Vren said nothing for a long moment. Finally he spoke, his voice quieter than before. "Then we shall see how deep that belief runs before this is finished." He turned and walked from the chamber, already forming, in the back of his mind, the shape of the challenge he intended to bring before the full council, once deliberations resumed. Back aboard the Kestrel, the crew settled into an uneasy wait, their small ship once again surrounded by the massive shapes of the council fleet, engines powered down, weapons systems dark. May sat quietly near the pilot station, running idle diagnostics more out of habit than necessity, her eyes occasionally drifting toward the small viewport and the endless dark beyond it. "Do you think they'll actually change their minds?" she asked after a while, not looking up from her console. "I don't know," Priya admitted, settling into a seat nearby. "Council law is old, and old institutions rarely change quickly, no matter how strong the argument against them is. But we planted doubt today. Real doubt, in front of witnesses who will carry that doubt home with them, no matter what the council ultimately decides." Amara leaned against the wall near the small galley, arms crossed, thinking back to the faces in the balconies, the quiet murmurs of agreement from species she had never even met before today. "I keep thinking about that Fenrir delegate," she said, "the way his voice shook when he spoke up for us. That took courage, more courage than I think we gave him credit for, back when we first started this mission." Diego stood near the ship's modest sensor display, watching the distant shapes of warships drifting silently in the dark. "So now what?" he asked quietly. "We just wait?" "We wait," Reyes confirmed, settling into the command chair, his eyes fixed on the same slow-moving shapes outside. "And we hope that somewhere in that fleet, there are enough voices willing to remember what their own laws are supposed to mean." Oscar glanced up from his engineering console, a rare flicker of worry crossing his usually calm face. "And if there aren't enough voices?" Reyes didn't answer right away. He simply looked out at the endless dark, at the thousands of warships surrounding their tiny vessel, and thought quietly of Earth, spinning peacefully, somewhere far behind them, unaware that its fate now rested entirely in the hands of a council still deciding whether words truly mattered more than fear. "Then," he finally said, "we make sure the whole galaxy remembers exactly how humanity chose to stand its ground." Outside, the fleet continued its silent vigil, waiting, watching, as the deliberations began behind closed doors. Deliberations that would decide not just the fate of 6 brave humans aboard a small scout ship, but the fate of an entire species, and perhaps, the fate of the galaxy's understanding of what true strength really meant. 3 days passed aboard the Kestrel, 3 days of waiting inside the belly of a fleet built to destroy them. The small ship remained docked within the judgment, surrounded by silence broken only by the occasional patrol of council soldiers passing outside the hull. and the quiet hum of systems kept carefully idle, to avoid drawing unwanted attention. Captain Elias Reyes spent much of that time pacing the narrow corridors of his ship, running through every possible outcome of the Council's deliberation in his mind. Dr. Priya Nair remained buried in legal texts, searching for any additional precedent that might strengthen their case, if called upon again. Amara Okafor kept constant watch over the communication systems, listening for any hint of movement within the fleet, any sign of what direction the Council's decision might take. May Tanaka kept the ship's engines ready at a moment's notice, while Oscar Lindquist quietly checked every system twice over, and Diego Ruiz kept a careful eye on the ship's modest defenses, though everyone knew those defenses would mean little against the fleet surrounding them. During those long hours of waiting, small moments of normalcy helped keep the crew steady. May taught Amara a few basic flight maneuvers on a training simulator built into the Kestrel systems, more to pass the time than out of any real necessity, though Amara found herself surprisingly good at it, a fact that made May laugh for the first time since they had left Earth. Oscar spent hours running diagnostics he had already run a dozen times before, unable to sit still, his hands needing something to do even when there was nothing left to fix. Diego kept a quiet watch over the ship's modest weapons and defensive systems, running simulations of combat scenarios that felt, at the time, more like exercises in patience than genuine preparation for battle. Reyes found Priya, late on the third night, still awake in the small galley, surrounded by data tablets, her eyes red, rimmed with exhaustion. "You should rest," he said gently, sitting down across from her. "I keep thinking about what else Vren might try," she said, not looking up from her notes. "He's not the kind of man who accepts losing gracefully. There has to be something else in the legal code he could use against us." "You've done everything you can," Reyes said. "Whatever happens next, it won't be because you didn't prepare enough." Priya finally looked up, a tired but grateful smile crossing her face. "Thank you for saying that. Doesn't make me want to stop reading, though." Reyes chuckled quietly. "Didn't think it would." It was on the morning of the fourth day, ship time, that Amara's console suddenly chimed with an urgent alert. "Captain," she said quickly, "we're receiving a priority transmission. It's Commander Threx." Reyes moved quickly to the command deck, the rest of the crew gathering close behind him. "Play it." Threx's voice filled the small cabin, tense and clipped. "Captain Reyes, you and your crew need to hear this directly. The Council has reached a decision regarding your case. However, there is a complication." "What kind of complication?" Reyes asked. "Councillor Vren has invoked an ancient challenge clause, buried deep within the same legal code your representative used to justify your presence here," Threx explained. "It is called the Proving Ground. It allows any council member to challenge the legitimacy of a species case, not through further argument, but through demonstration. Vren intends to use it against you." Priya stepped forward, her expression tightening. "What does the Proving Ground actually require?" There was a pause before Threx answered. "A combat trial. Your vessel against a council fleet detachment, within a designated combat zone. If your ship survives long enough to reach a specific marker point at the edge of the zone, your case is considered proven, and the correction order will be formally withdrawn. If you fail, humanity's fate will be decided immediately, without further debate." The cabin went silent. Diego was the first to speak, his voice tight. "How many ships in this detachment?" 12, Threx said grimly. "Standard Council escort cruisers. Fast, heavily armed, and experienced in combat maneuvers. Far more than a single scout vessel should reasonably be expected to survive against." "This is a trap," May said, anger flashing across her face. "They know we can't win a fight like that." "Perhaps," Threx admitted, an unusual note of discomfort in his voice. "But the clause is legitimate, and Vren has support among enough council members to force its use. I do not agree with this decision, Captain Reyes, but I am bound by my position to enforce it. You will be given 6 hours to prepare before the trial begins." The transmission ended, leaving the small crew standing in tense silence. 12 warships, Oscar said quietly, "against us." Reyes looked around at his crew, each face carrying a mixture of fear and determination. "Then we have 6 hours to figure out how a small ship survives 12 warships." The crew gathered around the Kestrel's small tactical display, studying every piece of information they had about the ship's capabilities, and every piece of intelligence Priya had managed to gather about standard Council combat cruisers during her research. "Their cruisers are fast," May said, pointing to the display, "but not as fast as us. Our stealth systems and engine efficiency give us an edge in raw speed and maneuverability. The problem is firepower. Even one of their cruisers could tear us apart in a direct fight." "So we don't fight directly," Diego said, leaning over the display. "We use the terrain." "What terrain?" Oscar asked. "It's open space." "Not entirely," Priya said, pulling up a star chart of the designated combat zone. "Look here. The zone includes the edge of an old asteroid field, remnants of a destroyed moon. Dense, chaotic, difficult for larger ships to navigate quickly." Reyes studied the chart carefully. "If we can lure them into the asteroid field, their size and firepower become liabilities instead of advantages. Big cruisers moving fast through dense debris risk collision damage. Meanwhile, we can weave through those gaps far more easily." "It's risky," May admitted, "but it's our best shot. If I can keep us moving unpredictably, using the asteroids as cover, we might be able to avoid direct hits long enough to reach the marker point." "There's another problem," Amara said quietly. "Our shields are strong for a ship our size, but they weren't built to withstand sustained cruiser fire. Even a few solid hits could cripple us." "Then we make sure we never take a few solid hits," Reyes said firmly. "Oscar, I need everything you can squeeze out of our engines and shields. Diego, I want every defensive system we have running at peak efficiency. May, you're going to fly the most important mission of your life. And Amara, keep monitoring their communications. If they coordinate an ambush, I want to know before it happens." Reyes studied the star chart a while longer, then looked around at his crew. "What about after the asteroid field? Once we're through, we're still exposed until we reach the marker. What's our plan for that final stretch?" "Speed and unpredictability," May said. "If I keep our vector changing constantly, small adjustments, nothing they can predict more than a second or two ahead, we make it much harder for their gunners to land a clean hit. It won't stop everything, but it should reduce how much damage we take. I can also reroute auxiliary power from non-essential systems into the shields during the final approach," Oscar added. "Life support, internal gravity, some of the secondary sensors. We won't need them for the 2 or 3 minutes it takes to cross that final stretch, and it'll give the shields a real boost right when we need it most." "Do it," Reyes said. "Diego, I want you monitoring their weapons charge in real time. If you see a cruiser about to fire a heavier shot, I want a warning the second you spot it, not after." "Already on it," Diego confirmed, already adjusting his console to track energy signatures across the enemy formation. Priya looked up from her notes, her expression thoughtful. "There's one more thing. The Proving Ground Clause states the trial must be conducted under standard Council combat protocols. That means specific rules of engagement, weapon calibration limits, no orbital bombardment support, no reinforcements beyond the initial 12 ships. If we can identify any of their soldiers or captains willing to speak honestly, we might learn details that give us an edge." "Leave that to me," Amara said. "I've spent the last 3 days listening to fleet communications. There are cracks in their unity. Not everyone agrees with Vren's methods." As the 6 hours ticked away, the crew worked with quiet, focused determination, checking systems, running simulations, preparing themselves mentally and physically for what would likely be the most dangerous flight of their lives. There was no more talk of fear, no more hesitation, only preparation, and the quiet resolve of 6 people who understood exactly what was at stake. In the final minutes before the trial began, Reyes gathered his crew one last time near the command deck. He looked at each of them in turn, May's steady hands, Oscar's quiet strength, Diego's calm focus, Amara's careful attentiveness, Priya's tired but determined eyes. 6 months ago, Reyes said quietly, none of us knew this day was coming. We trained for scouting missions, for quiet, careful work, far from any kind of battle like this. But here we are, about to fly the most important mission any human has ever flown, not because we're the strongest ship out there, not because we have the best weapons, but because we're willing to try something no one else has tried in 200 years. Whatever happens today, I am proud to be flying with every one of you. May reached over and gave his shoulder a firm squeeze. Let's go prove them wrong, Captain. One by one, the crew returned to their stations, the quiet hum of the Kestrel's engines rising steadily beneath them, as the final countdown to the trial began. According to the records Priya had gathered, the shattered moon had once belonged to a world destroyed centuries ago, during one of the Council's earliest wars of expansion, a war fought long before Vren's time, back when the Council itself was still young and hungry for territory. It seemed a fitting, if grim, location for a trial meant to test whether humanity deserved a place among the stars, surrounded by the broken remains of a world that had lost that same right long ago. The designated combat zone stretched wide across a barren region of space, marked at its center by the remains of a shattered moon, its debris scattered in a slow, endless drift that formed a dense, chaotic field of rock and metal fragments. At the far edge of the zone, a small marker beacon pulsed steadily, the target the Kestrel needed to reach to prove humanity's case. 12 Council cruisers waited in tight formation near the entry point, sleek and heavily armed, their crews prepared and confident. Watching from a safe distance aboard a Council observation vessel, Councillor Vren stood with arms crossed, a thin smile playing at the edges of his mouth as he watched the small human ship approach the starting point. "Let us see," he murmured quietly to himself, "how far arrogance can carry a species." Aboard the Kestrel, Reyes sat in the command chair, watching the 12 enemy ships arranged ahead of them, their weapons systems already primed and ready. Behind him, his crew stood at their stations, faces set with quiet determination. "Everyone ready?" he asked. "Ready," May confirmed, hands steady on the controls. "Shields at maximum efficiency," Diego reported. "Engines primed," Oscar added. "Comms locked and monitoring," Amara said. "Legal observers standing by to confirm trial conditions," Priya finished. Reyes took a slow breath, steadying himself. "Then let's show them exactly what humanity is made of." A signal flashed across the display, marking the official start of the trial. Instantly, the 12 Council cruisers surged forward, weapon systems flaring to life, closing the distance with terrifying speed. "May, take us in," Reyes ordered. The Kestrel shot forward, engines flaring bright, angling directly toward the dense asteroid field ahead. Behind them, the Council cruisers adjusted course, moving to intercept, their superior firepower already beginning to light up the space around the small human ship with warning shots meant to test their defenses. "Incoming fire," Diego called out as the first shots streaked past, close enough to rattle the ship with the shockwave of near misses. "Evasive pattern Delta," May shouted, throwing the Kestrel into a sharp, twisting dive, weaving between the first scattered fragments of asteroid debris as the cruisers struggled to adjust their aim against the small, fast-moving target. The ship rattled and groaned as it cut hard around a jagged spire of rock, close enough that Oscar could see individual cracks along its surface through the side viewport. Alarms chirped steadily in the background, a constant reminder of just how thin the margin for error truly was. "Cruiser designation 7, closing from starboard," Amara called out, watching the tactical display shift rapidly as the enemy ships adjusted their pursuit. "They're trying to box us in against that large formation ahead." "I see it," May said, already banking the Kestrel sharply downward, ducking beneath a slow tumbling chunk of debris the size of a small building, the ship's hull barely clearing the jagged edge by what felt like only a few meters. "That was closer than I would have liked," Oscar muttered, gripping his console tightly. "Noted," May said, though the faintest hint of a grin flickered across her face despite the danger. "Feel free to fly it better next time." Behind them, one of the pursuing cruisers attempted a bold maneuver, cutting across a wide gap between two large asteroid clusters in an attempt to close the distance quickly. For a moment, it seemed to work, the massive ship gaining ground rapidly on the smaller Kestrel. Then, without warning, it clipped the edge of a smaller debris cluster hidden in its shadow, sending sparks and debris scattering across space as the cruiser was forced to slow sharply, venting atmosphere from a damaged section along its hull. "One down, sort of," Diego said, watching the display with grim satisfaction. 11 to go. "Don't celebrate yet," Reyes warned. "We're barely a third of the way through this field." Watching from the observation vessel, Councillor Vren's thin smile had begun to fade, replaced by a tightening frown as he watched his cruisers struggle against a ship a fraction of their size. Beside him, an aide shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to speak. Vren said nothing, his eyes fixed on the display, calculating, recalculating, refusing to believe that his carefully arranged trial might not unfold the way he had intended. The battle had begun, and as the Kestrel disappeared into the chaotic maze of drifting rock and metal, pursued by 12 warships far larger and more powerful than itself, the entire fate of humanity now rested on the skill, courage, and quiet determination of 6 people flying the smallest ship in a fight no one expected them to survive. The asteroid field swallowed the Kestrel whole, chunks of rock and twisted metal drifting silently in every direction, remnants of a moon destroyed long before humanity had ever left its own solar system. Inside this maze, the small human ship darted and weaved, engines glowing bright, as Mei Tanaka guided them through gaps barely wide enough for the hull to pass, all while 12 Council cruisers thundered close behind, weapons flashing, trying desperately to find a clear shot. "They're gaining!" Diego Ruiz called out, watching the tactical display as 2 of the cruisers split off from the main group, attempting to flank the Kestrel from either side. "I see them," Mei said through gritted teeth, throwing the ship into a tight spiral around a massive floating chunk of rock, narrowly avoiding a burst of cannon fire that tore through the space where they had been only a second earlier. "Shields down to 82%, Oscar Lindquist reported from his station, sweat beading on his forehead as he monitored the ship's systems. "We took a glancing hit." "Keep us moving," Reyes ordered, gripping the arms of his chair as the ship shuddered from another near miss. "Don't give them a stationary target." Behind them, the Council cruisers pressed forward, their larger size becoming exactly the disadvantage the crew had hoped for. Twice, 2 cruisers nearly collided while trying to match the Kestrel's tight, unpredictable turns through the debris field. A third clipped the edge of a large asteroid fragment, sending sparks flying across its hull as it was forced to slow down and adjust course. Aboard one of the pursuing cruisers, a young weapons officer named Kale watched the small human ship weave impossibly through the debris field with growing frustration. He had trained for years under the Council's finest combat instructors, had studied 1,000 simulated battles, yet nothing in his training had prepared him for an opponent that refused to fly the way an opponent was supposed to fly. "Target lock keeps failing," he called out to his captain. "Their movement pattern doesn't match anything in our combat database." "Keep trying," his captain snapped back, frustration evident in his voice. "It is a single small ship. We will not be outmaneuvered by 6 creatures who have barely left their own solar system." But even as he said it, doubt had already begun creeping into his voice, doubt that would only grow as the chase continued deeper into the debris field. "They're struggling with the terrain," Priya Nair said, watching the display with cautious hope. "Just like we planned." "Struggling isn't the same as failing," Diego warned. "They're still closing the gap." Ahead, the marker beacon pulsed steadily in the distance, still painfully far away. Mei adjusted their course, threading the Kestrel between 2 massive slabs of shattered rock, the ship's hull groaning slightly from the strain of such tight maneuvering at high speed. Suddenly, Amara Okafor's console lit up with an urgent alert. "Captain, I'm picking up a change in their formation. 4 cruisers are breaking off, moving to cut us off from the marker point directly. They're not chasing anymore. They're setting up an ambush." Reyes leaned forward, studying the display. "Show me." The tactical display revealed the grim truth. 4 Council cruisers had positioned themselves in a tight formation, directly between the Kestrel and the marker beacon, weapons already charging, forming a wall of firepower that would be nearly impossible to fly through unharmed. "If we fly straight at that formation," Mei said quietly, "we won't survive it." The remaining 8 cruisers continued closing in from behind, slowly herding the Kestrel toward the waiting ambush, exactly like predators driving prey toward a trap. "There has to be another way through," Reyes said, studying the asteroid field ahead. Oscar's eyes suddenly widened as he studied a secondary display. "Wait, there's a narrow channel, right along the outer edge of the debris field, close to the marker point. It's tight, barely wide enough for us, filled with smaller fragments moving fast, but it bypasses their ambush completely." "How narrow?" Mei asked. "Very," Oscar admitted. "One mistake, and the rocks do their job for them." Reyes looked at Mei, whose hands were already tightening on the controls, her jaw set with fierce determination. "Can you fly it?" "I can fly anything," Mei said simply. "Send me the coordinates." As the new path lit up on her display, Mei banked the Kestrel sharply, diving toward the outer edge of the debris field, away from the ambush formation, and directly into the narrow, chaotic channel Oscar had identified. Behind them, the Council cruisers scrambled to adjust, but their larger size made it impossible to follow into such a tight passage. Inside the channel, the Kestrel twisted and turned through a storm of tumbling debris, small fragments bouncing off the reinforced hull, larger chunks narrowly avoided through split-second reflexes and pure skill. Every alarm on the ship seemed to be blaring at once, warning of proximity hazards, hull stress, and shield fluctuations, but May's hands never wavered, guiding the small ship through the deadly maze with a precision that seemed almost impossible. "We're through," she shouted as the Kestrel burst out of the narrow channel, the marker beacon suddenly visible directly ahead, close enough now to make out its details clearly. Behind them, the 8 pursuing cruisers, unable to follow through the narrow channel, were forced to swing wide around the debris field, costing them precious time. The 4 ambush cruisers, caught off guard by the Kestrel's sudden change in direction, scrambled to adjust their formation, but it was too late. "Full power to engines," Reyes ordered. "May, get us to that marker." The Kestrel surged forward, engines blazing at maximum output, racing across the open space toward the pulsing beacon. Weapons fire streaked past from the scrambling cruisers, close but no longer accurate enough to find their mark, as the small ship's speed and unpredictable flight path proved too much to track effectively. 50 seconds to marker point," Amara called out, her voice tight with tension. A final volley of cannon fire tore past the Kestrel's hull, close enough to rattle the entire ship, shields flaring bright as they absorbed the edge of the blast. "Shields at 40%, Oscar shouted. "We can't take another hit like that." "We won't need to," May said through gritted teeth, pushing the engines even harder. 20 seconds. The marker beacon grew larger on the view screen, its pulsing light steady and bright, a small point of hope in the vast darkness surrounding them. Behind them, the pursuing cruisers continued firing, their shots growing increasingly desperate and inaccurate as the distance to the marker shrank. 10 seconds. Reyes gripped the arms of his chair, watching the marker approach, every second feeling like an eternity. 5 seconds. A final shot streaked past, missing by mere meters. "We're through." The Kestrel crossed the marker point in a blaze of light, engines cutting sharply as May brought the ship to a controlled stop just beyond the boundary of the combat zone. Behind them, the pursuing Council cruisers slowed as well, their weapons falling silent, bound by the same rules that had governed the trial from its very beginning. For a long moment, silence filled the small command deck, broken only by the sound of heavy breathing and racing hearts as the crew slowly realized what they had just accomplished. "We made it," Diego said quietly, disbelief clear in his voice. "We actually made it." Reyes allowed himself a small, exhausted smile. "We made it." Aboard the observation vessel, Counselor Vren stared at the display in stunned silence, watching the small human ship sitting calmly beyond the marker point, its shields flickering but intact, its crew alive and unharmed by the trial's harsh rules. Around him, murmurs of astonishment rippled through the gathered Council officials, who had come to witness what most had assumed would be a quick and decisive execution. Fleet Commander Threx stood nearby, a look of quiet respect settling over his weathered features. "The trial is complete, Counselor. By the rules you yourself invoked, the humans have proven their case." Vren's jaw tightened, his composure cracking slightly for the first time since the ordeal began. "This changes nothing," he said sharply. "One successful trial does not erase the danger this species represents." "Perhaps not," Threx replied evenly. "But the law is the law, Counselor, and you were the one who chose to invoke it." The Council watched this trial unfold. Every representative in that chamber, and countless others across the galaxy who will hear of this soon enough, now know that humanity faced 12 of our finest warships and survived, not through overwhelming force, but through skill, courage, and clever thinking. That is not a story easily dismissed. The formal announcement took place later that same day, in the same massive chamber where Reyes and his crew had first presented their case. Vren stood stiffly at the center of the platform, his voice tight and controlled, as he read the official withdrawal into the Council record, each word sounding as though it cost him something to say. Around the chamber, the assembled representatives listened in near silence, many exchanging quiet glances, aware that they were witnessing something that would be remembered for a very long time. Reluctantly, formally, and under the watchful eyes of dozens of council representatives, the correction order against humanity was withdrawn. The Kestrel, battered but victorious, was granted safe passage back through council space, escorted respectfully by Fleet Commander Threx himself, who had come to admire, quietly and privately, the courage of the small human crew who had refused to back down. Word of what had happened at the judgment spread quickly across the galaxy, carried through whispered conversations, quiet trade negotiations, and cautious diplomatic messages between species who had, for centuries, lived under the shadow of council dominance. The story of the smallest warship, crewed by 6 brave humans who had faced impossible odds and walked away victorious, became something of a legend among smaller species who had long dreamed of standing up against the old order without fear of annihilation. On a dozen worlds humanity had never even visited, the story of the Kestrel was told and retold, sometimes with details added or changed along the way, until it became something closer to myth than history. In some versions, the ship had faced 20 cruisers instead of 12. In others, Captain Reyes had spoken directly to Vren, with words sharp enough to silence the entire council chamber. The details mattered less than the feeling the story carried with it, a feeling that had been rare among smaller species for a very long time: hope. The Fenrai delegate who had first spoken in humanity's defense returned home to find his own people celebrating the news, quietly but genuinely, grateful that someone, finally, had stood up and been heard. Even Counselor Yara Voss, who had voiced her quiet doubts about the correction order from the very beginning, found herself receiving quiet messages of gratitude from smaller species across the Council's territory, thanking her for the doubts she had raised, doubts that had, in some small way, helped keep the door open long enough for humanity to walk through it. Back on Earth, the return of the Kestrel was met with quiet, overwhelming relief. There were no massive parades, no grand celebrations, only the simple, profound gratitude of a planet that understood just how close it had come to losing everything, and just how much 6 ordinary people had risked to save it. General Marcus Webb stood on the landing platform as the Kestrel touched down gently at the orbital shipyard, watching as Captain Elias Reyes and his crew stepped down the boarding ramp, tired but alive, having accomplished something no one had truly believed possible. "You did it," Webb said simply, extending a hand toward Reyes. Reyes shook it firmly, exhaustion evident in his eyes, though a quiet sense of pride lingered beneath the surface. "We didn't fight a war, General. We just refused to be afraid." Inside the small crew quarters aboard the Kestrel, before the final descent to Earth, the 6 crew members gathered one last time together as a group, the mission finally, truly over. "I keep waiting to wake up," May admitted, leaning back against the wall, exhaustion and relief mixing plainly on her face. "Feels too strange to be real." "It's real," Oscar said quietly, a small, rare smile crossing his face. "Ship still in one piece, mostly." Diego laughed softly at that, the tension of the past weeks finally beginning to ease from his shoulders. "Mostly is good enough for me." Amara looked around at each of them, her voice quieter than usual. "We did something today that no one thought was possible. I don't think any of us will ever fully explain to people back home what it felt like, standing there in that chamber, flying through that fleet. We don't have to explain it," Priya said gently. "We just have to remember it, that's enough." Reyes looked at his crew, pride swelling quietly in his chest, more than he could easily put into words. "Whatever happens next, however the galaxy remembers this, I will always remember exactly who was flying beside me when it mattered most." In the months that followed, humanity's standing among the galaxy's smaller species grew steadily stronger, built not on fear or force, but on the simple, undeniable proof that Earth was willing to stand its ground, calmly and courageously, even against the mightiest fleet in the galaxy. New alliances formed. New trade agreements flourished, and slowly, quietly, the old order that Counselor Vren had fought so desperately to protect began to shift, challenged not by grand armies or powerful weapons, but by the simple courage of 6 people aboard the smallest warship in Earth's fleet. And somewhere among the stars, the Kestrel remained ready, a small, quiet symbol of exactly what humanity was capable of, when faced with impossible odds. Not the loudest voice in the room, not the strongest fist raised in anger, but the steady, unshakable will to stand tall, no matter how small the ship, and no matter how large the storm surrounding it. Humanity had been ordered to surrender. Instead, it had sent its smallest warship, and in doing so, had shown the entire galaxy exactly what true strength really looked like.